Hi guys, welcome back to In Pursuit of Our Roots. Today we're going to be talking about Chapter 3, Part 3, Slaves, Soldiers, and the Outcome of the Revolution. So we're just going to get right on into it. So the book starts off giving us like a little bit of what's been like going on, like what's going to go on in like the chapter and just a summary of it just a little bit. And it talks about that after the British like lost the war and how they went back to Britain, that the north part of the colonies, they were like, okay, like we don't need to like have slaves. Like we've seen what's been going on in the war with like slaves going over to the British side and fighting because they were going to get their freedom, and then like coming to the American side and fighting because they were going to get their freedom. All in all, the North decided like, all right, we're just not going to like do slavery. So they abolished it in the North, which I believe really after the war clearly signified what the North and the South was. And I think Jackson can agree with me on that, on how they both were with slavery, for which probably later on in the book, it will talk about how we get to like the Civil War because of that. But heading right into it, the British used a strategy called the Southern Strategy, and its goal was to crush the rebellion by retaking the South, which was home to far more loyalists than the Northeast. So they were talking about that Black loyalists were crucial to their efforts from the start. And I kind of wanted to ask Jackson, like, how do you feel about that, knowing that like Black like loyalists were crucial from the start to help the British kind of with the war with the Patriots?
So honestly, it makes sense. So when you think about it, right, you got the British coming in. Most of them are soldiers from the mainland of Britain. So a lot of them are going into unknown territory, which is highlighted throughout the history books. We talk about the Minutemen. We talk about people who knew the terrain and often hid behind trees while the British stuck in stacks for some reason. Stupidest idea ever. But to digress, they didn't know the terrain, so often they'd stack in those stacks to try to like guard each other. So when it came to the Blacks and their play with the British, it makes sense because the Blacks, they've been there. Most of them have been there for probably like the last 100 years. You spend like at least 5 years at a place, you can figure out your surroundings and stuff. So they often came in handy with navigating for them and often finding, hey, go this way. They talk about the elderly enslaved Black man that gave the lieutenant the idea of going through the swamp to surprise them the capture of Savannah, if I'm correct, right? Yeah,
Correct.
you know. So Black people played a crucial role for the British. I definitely say that.
I agree with you for sure that they
Mm-hmm.
definitely played a crucial role for the British and like helping them with the war, even though they ended up losing it at the end. It talks about in Georgia, a Black sailor named Samson. Samson guided the British fleet over shoals at the mouth of the Savannah River, talking about what Jackson just described about how the British were trying to retake Savannah, and how, of course, the elderly man named Quamno Dolly approached a Lieutenant Colonel with his plans for an alternative approach, because the British were gonna like go right in there, be like, all right, we're about to like take over Savannah, but the Patriots, like, they burned down the bridge, and the only way to get into the town was just like one way access, and they were guarding it like heavily. So most definitely that elderly slave man helped them recapture Savannah in a very surprising way. And also goes to show that like Black people, even though a lot of them thought at that time that we were not smart, like we were smart. Like we came up with these plans. Like it was like no one else. Like they didn't come up with these plans. Like we came up with these plans to like help them in so many ways. So I think that really has to be established, that the crucial part in everything is that we came up with these plans to help them, even though at the end we were hoping to gain our freedom on the British side of things. It goes on to talk about the Phillipsburg Proclamation, and it expanded Lord Dunmore's proclamation by promising to free all slaves willing to serve in any capacity rather than just those who join fighting. So this proclamation, it reaches out to everyone. It's kind of like, if we win the war, like y'all will all be free, not just because like you fought in the war, but like you'll all be free. And like that gives a very good incentive to every single slave that if we go join the British, like we don't have to go back to like our cruel masters who've like treated us so badly. Like we could walk around free and everything. So I want to kind of get like your perspective on this proclamation, Jackson, because even though we know at the end of the day, like they didn't win the war and none of this happened, sadly, I guess it's just the hope in it for like Black people with this proclamation that we just don't have to fight in the war, but we can fight in it, but we're also fighting for like all our brothers and sisters who are enslaved.
It was kind of sad part. I was kind of rooting for British for reading this. Not even gonna lie. I was really hoping they get their freedom. I was like, come on. We know they weren't, sadly, because of history, the way things ended up. But reading it, you're like, I hope they at least get to the mainland. Sadly, that's not what's happened. It was disappointing to read, but to put myself in their situation, I can't imagine not only the disappointment, but the realization that you lost the war, and now what happens next? Are British gonna take me? Are they gonna leave me here? And then I gotta go deal with my old master. Should I go escape like maybe west or just try and find my own way out? Maybe we could do this or that. Just trying to figure out what's next. I would be absolutely terrified.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
True. I most definitely felt that. It was more of just like this hope, even though we both know at the end, just because of like American history, that like the British lost. American, they like won the war. I put one really because like, but yeah,
Yeah.
kind of sucks. It kind of sucks knowing that like, dang, I gotta be in this land for which they're still gonna hold me as a slave
Mm-hmm.
if I don't want to run up to the north, if
Mm-hmm.
I don't cross the border into Canada, or if I just don't sneak away on like some type of British like boat that's gonna take me to like one of these other like colonies that they like have. But it does suck. The book also talks about, which was kind of like surprising in a sense, that the rising presence of African American soldiers in the Continental Army often undermined British attempts to use the Patriots' own slaves against them. And I found that really interesting because I'm like, wait, like the British with their Phillipsburg's proclamation is technically saying like, even though we need more people, but like if this happens, like bam, kind of like um you're kind of like all free in a sense. But the Blacks with like the Patriots, it's kind of funny thinking that they like really stalled the British and like making like attempts to like really like crush the Patriots. And it kind of like makes me think like they must have been loyal because of course we know that they gained their freedom more than like the people, the Black people who fought on the British side. But that they were loyal to like the Patriots. And it like even goes back to when we were talking about the Boston Massacre, really. Like what's that person's name? I forget. It was Atticus.
Atticus. Yes,
Yeah, it
ma'am.
was Atticus. Well, I'm
Yes,
like
ma'am.
flipping my pages that like even Atticus, even though he was killed, like he was loyal to the cause of like the Patriots. That even though he didn't like slavery, he didn't like the British even more on like what they were doing to the colonists. So kind of how did you think about it, Jackson? Because I kind of found it kind of like, a little contradicting, like sides a
Uh,
little bit.
yeah. So I felt like when you start off saying in the book, it mentions in the beginning, right, of the chapter we're talking about right now, that they're crucial to the British side. I'd say we're crucial to both sides
Mm-hmm.
because without being on the American sides, the we talked about previous in the last chapter that the Americans during that time, they're low in people, they're low in men, so they started adding slaves to their ranks because they had no choice in the option, right? They say, hey, you may have your freedom, you may not. We'll see what happens depending on where you live, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So without us getting into the war, this could have been a very different outcome, especially with coming into the same knowledge that other Black slaves did. They probably played counterintelligence. They talk about a Black spy also in there, you know, that went to the British side and got a lot of crucial information to war on their plans and what they were planning on doing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say we're crucial for both sides. Without us, the Americans could end up even more worse off.
I agree. And just to add on to what you said about agents, it talked about an ex-slave named James Armstead who double-crossed, or who was a double agent for General Marquis de Lafayette in 1781, who he used to go to the British side to get information on the British, and the British used him to get information about what was going on the American side. Of course, Armstead, he got more information from the British side and what was going on, and he was truthful with the Patriots of what was going on the British side. Later on, the chapter talks about how the lieutenant of the group of which Armstead was dealing information from, he was like, oh my gosh, like, it's you, like, when he found out he was double crossed. But we'll get to that later. Moving on, it talks about the faith of the Black Loyalist. It talks about how the British surrendered a week later after they lost the war, evacuating their troops and leaving their Black allies behind. As the British boarded their boats, American troops patrolled the banks of the York River to ensure that no African Americans would escape to get on the boat with the British after they lost the battle at Yorktown. It really kind of does go to show, it goes to show that, like, one, that was like a big blow to Black Loyalists, knowing that, like, they're not going to get on the boat with them and, like, go to wherever they're going to. Probably as a Black Loyalist at that time, the only thing you're probably thinking that I'm not getting on the boat, but also they can re-enslave me and I can go back to my master or wherever they used to be at, for which I escaped. Also, it also goes to show how the Patriots' very contradicting nature that they had Blacks fight in the war, and even though they weren't loyalists, but also how they were very strict and stringent on patrolling the banks of York River, that no African Americans would get free, and stating that, like, they are, like, still property no matter what. And I still think it still, like, speaks to, like, the people who fought on the Patriot side, like, you're not going anywhere. Even if you, like, are free, you're still restricted in the sense that even though you fought in the war with us, you might be free, you're really not free. Even though you fought on the opposite side, the wrong side of the war, you're not getting out of here at all. Like, this is like your dungeon, like, and we're, like, not going to let you out at all. So how did you think about that, Jackson?
I found it really interesting. I found a whole entire thing about the boat really interesting, about how, when we started out talking about the chapter book as a whole, right? They're scared of the boat, don't get on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Boat's going to take you to America. And now the boat's their only hope to get away from the Americans. So I found that really interesting. I also found this quote really interesting that they put in there. This is probably like my favorite quote so far that we read. And it's about the British, their thoughts about leaving the Blacks on dry, leaving the Blacks out to dry and for the Americans to go reclaim. And they said, we used them to a good advantage. We set them free. And now with fear and trembling, they had to face the reward of their cruel master. And it's just like,
it sucks. Even
it
they
sucks.
knew. Even they
It
knew.
sucks. They knew it. They knew what they were leaving them to do. They knew what they were leaving their fate to be. And I couldn't imagine what was done to them once they got back to their plantations. With things that were said, what I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't. I want to wish that upon anyone.
I wouldn't wish that upon anyone either.
Mm-mm.
But I think that quote is important because I don't know if you felt a different type of way after reading after what was said after the quote. And the book talks about how Parliament had never intended to abolish American slavery. Like, they never did.
Mm-mm.
At all. It goes on to say that if they did, it would compromise Britain's multi-million-dollar investment in the slave trade. So to Parliament, British side, and with the American side, while they still had control of that, like slavery really was never going to be abolished, like at all. It was a moneymaker. It sustained like the economy. Also, slaves built a lot too. So it was really never their intention at all. And there's a British statement that was said by Edmund Burke, who was a British statesman, and he warned that Parliament that freeing slaves to fight might unleash conflict even more strenuous than the American bid for independence. So that was interesting to me because this man was saying that who really cares about these people getting like their independence? Like, let them get their independence. If we go to fight for like the freedom of slaves, that's going to be like catastrophic, especially if we let them fight too.
Mhm.
Little did he know he was kind of foreshadowing what was going to happen. Like, I really don't really like know the specific number, but like 100 years from
Yeah,
them, and
175.
yeah, 100 years for which would lead up to the Civil War in America, with fighting for the freedom of slaves, and like even them fighting in the war to free themselves, more or less. So I kind of found it interesting, but I kind of found it a little bit funny that like you just foreshadowed what was going to happen in America this time on. But also it goes on to say that even though the British promised all the slaves, the Black Loyalists that fought in the war with them, it kind of like makes you think like, and even though the book answers this later, that would they have really truly been free if like they had no intention of abolishing it
Mhm.
at all? Like, was this really just saying it to say it, knowing that like these people have been through a lot, playing on people's like emotions and hopes and like dreams that like they could have a better life, really? Like, that's the thing, like the uncertainty, knowing that like they never had any intentions of abolishing it at all. So I kind of want to get your take on it, Jackson.
So put yourself in perspective of a slave man, right, or a slave woman. You go for the British, you travel your whole family down there, you escape your slave master. Somehow you made out that. Then you made it all the way down when you get those slave hunters are constantly hunting for those escaping slaves. You somehow made it all the way to Florida to fight for your freedom, right, for the British side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if they did win, to realize that, hey, I got my freedom, but my friends back here, they're still enslaved. I feel crossed. I feel very crossed. I feel like they're just, as you said, saying that just to try to entice Black people, try to join their side for the hope of victory when they had no idea, when they had no intention of following through with that action. It's messed up. It's messed up.
It is. Um, it talks about that there were like some Blacks that did get on like the British ship when they did leave
Mm-hmm.
America. Like, it does talk about like there were Blacks that got on the ship. It wasn't all of them. It wasn't all of them who fought in the war, because we have to remember that the British had 15,000 African American loyalists that fought with them on their side, while the Americans only had like 5,000. And some of them only got on the boat with them, but it goes to show that many former slaves were resold into slavery in Jamaica and other British colonies, while others found themselves claimed as property by unscrupulous British soldiers and subjected to reenslavement or to be sold. So that kind of answered the question that we had a couple minutes ago, on that really they didn't really have any freedom. Like, it was a whole joke. Like, that whole entire thing was a whole joke. Like, you get on a boat, you think like, yes, we're free, but like, no, you get re-enslaved in one of Britain's like colonies. Or the funny and the most bizarre thing is that the people who you fought for that way they could keep America, the British soldiers, they claimed you as property, and like they made you their slaves. Like, Like, I don't know about you, but I'm just like, that is so messed up. Like, you go around and do a whole entire switcheroo, and like the people who you fought with to keep America and who didn't want to go back to their masters because they wanted the freedom and you didn't even give it to them, but like you fought side by side and you claim them as property. Like, hello, that's so sick and twisted. Like, that's just crazy. And like the book just mentioned that like some were like able to like be free, but even that was hard. Even that was hard. But like that was the most shocking thing that like I found mainly in just that one line, that like British soldiers really like put Black loyalists who fought with them and claimed them as property and made them their slaves.
It's like a
Like,
movie plot twist. It really
that's a
is.
whole plot twist that your girl was not expecting. Not today. But what do you think about it, Jackson? Let me digress.
I mean, you see it in my face right now. Reading that, I was like, oh, it's infuriating. It really is. It's not, it's worse than annoying. It's like, it makes you mad. It really does make you mad. That's like the first time. I've been mad a couple of times, but I think that was the maddest I've been. Because imagine that. You did all that fighting, right? We just talked about it. You got your family, you got to Florida, finally did all that fighting. And somehow, by some miracle, you're one of like the few hundred that made it on the boat, right? To be sold somewhere else. Don't trust the boat. Trust the boat.
Don't trust the boat. Because what is it? Even the book said that like they were so afraid of the boat that they had to like cut off hands because they were like holding so tight to the boat that they like wouldn't let go. The boat is traumatizing.
Dude, I think I'm gonna have a fear of boats after reading all this.
Bro, me too. Someone's like, do
Don't
you want to
trust
get on
the
the
boat.
boat? You want to go on a boat? You want to go on a cruise on the boat? I'll be like,
Um,
no.
we don't do boats.
We don't do boats. We don't do boats. I'll get on a plane and we can just look out the window and look at the water if that's how you feel. Or we can fly to that destination, but your girl's not getting on no boat. No, thank you.
No,
Boats
man.
are traumatizing. And also,
Boats are
the
canceled.
girl has her hair done, and I don't agree with the water if I go overboard. So that's on that. Your girl paid too much money for that.
Oh my gosh.
But no, that's gonna have to be something said. Be like, you want to go on a boat? Nope, you can't.
Okay. No boats.
No boats. Like,
Mm-mm.
why? Because my ancestors have had a traumatic reasoning for getting on boats, and it has passed down through generation of Black people. No, thank you.
No, thank you.
But anyway, bypassing our understanding that we're not gonna get on a boat.
Hey, you want to hear something crazy real quick?
What?
You think that's why Black people don't like water? Like we don't swim, right? Most of us. Like it's a stereotype for sure, but
It is a stereotype, but it's understandable.
yes,
It's like it does come from it because we did talk about in the beginning of when they were
exactly.
talking about the Atlantic slave trade that they went overboard a lot, and that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of a lot of I wouldn't say like a lot of horrific things because a lot of horrific things have happened on lands with like whipping and like rape and everything like that. But like
Mm-hmm.
we've talked about how they swam off the coast of South America and how they drowned diving for pearls and how like some
Mm-hmm.
were like eaten by sharks. So I guess the relationship between Black people and like water,
Especially the ocean.
the ocean especially, like I would understand that if that's where like the stereotype comes from, not just because like we just don't want to get our hair wet, that it has a deeper
Mm-hmm.
meaning that like we've been killed by like water and stuff. And
Mm-hmm. Like even like my mama, we don't do boats. Like we don't go on cruises, none of that because we don't. I don't trust boats. I really don't. I don't get on boats like unless it's like in like a little lake or something. That's
yeah, like a
fine.
lake.
Like I
I'll
don't
be
think I'd
fine.
ever get on a cruise. Not gonna lie. Mm-mm.
I don't think so either. I think it would have to be like a boat in like a lake or something like that.
Yeah, like
But
somewhere safer. You can make it back to shore.
yeah, I think that could be like a good understanding, because I really don't know where the stereotype of like Black people don't really, specifically like Black women, but it goes for like Black men too, that like we don't like to get in the water because of our hair and stuff, but also at the same time just like it's gotta be
It might
something
be a
more.
deeper meaning to it.
Yeah, like it could
That's what I
be
was
this.
curious about.
It could be this. Like
Mm-hmm.
we've died by water because of other people. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
good
Look,
connection, man. Good connection. Good
there it
connection.
is.
Um, Closing out the book, it talks about closer to freedom. It talks about, like Jackson mentioned already, that most of the 5,000 Blacks who served among the American forces ended up free, although some struggled to achieve their freedom. Um, we've talked about, and also it's like mentioned just in American like history books as well, that like after the war, you see the clear distinction between the North and the South. That of course later on, leading up to the Civil War, that the South will become this big manufacturer of like cotton and stuff because of like the cotton gin and interchangeable parts. That would be more of like the North side, and like them building like textile industries and stuff. But also like in the North, even though Blacks were free, they were very much confined in their spaces. It wasn't really like a freedom to like vote. It really wasn't a freedom to like, of course, as we've seen throughout history, like eat in the same places as everyone else, to be subjugated to where you work at. Like this is like the only job and like places for which you can like work at. Like you can't be like a lawyer, you can't be a businessman that's like high up or anything like that. So it was established in the North, even though the North abolished slavery. Just abolishing slavery just doesn't solve the whole societal text of it all. So I kind of want to hear your feelings about this, that even though the 5,000 that they were freed, most definitely they were guaranteed that freedom, that they struggled to achieve
Mm-hmm.
more of like societal freedom. Physical freedom was there, but
Mm-hmm.
societal freedom was not there at all.
I think we talked about in the last podcast about freedom with a leash. You're free to a certain extent. So
Mm-hmm.
you're not bounded to do the work, right? And most of them went back to yard work anyway because they couldn't get much jobs. But besides that, to then deal with societal issues, that doesn't get rid of racism. That doesn't get rid of how every white person looks at you, how they will treat you. That doesn't get rid of any of that. I won't get rid of you walking into a store and a white man can just say, no, we don't serve Blacks.
Mm-hmm.
All that is still there. So,
Do you think also, while we're like in this moment,
mm-hmm,
um, because I know for me, like I know you're not like on Instagram or like anything like that, but
mm-hmm,
seeing like my feed, like Black Lives Matter has, I wouldn't say like completely gone off like my feed at all, but it has been like lowered because
mm-hmm,
certain types of things, but then like it's raised back up again once like another casualty with police, or just being profiled by a person that's not a person of color,
mm-hmm.
that um, that Blacks today, do you feel as if, even though we've gone through the civil rights movement with Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and everything like that, Rosa Parks, and that we have like that freedom to like walk into a store and like to be served just like everyone else, to like sit in a restaurant just with everyone else, do you still think that in the statement by the book that we are free as a people, but we struggle to achieve that freedom still
Mm.
in like today?
So we still have that leash kind of on us.
Yeah, like what you were saying, like we still have that type of
Yeah,
leash.
I think that's I think that's still true because we still have financial barriers, things like that. We talk about other things like my mind's kind of clouded. We talk about other things when it comes to nowadays issues, when it comes to police brutality, how we're still looked at, how we're still served. Way worse when we go to court, right? The Black men will most likely get the maximum sentence. You know how it goes.
Yeah,
But we still do have that leash on us. Yes, it's not that big, bulky metal collar anymore, but we still have that leash on us still, I would say, most definitely.
most definitely, for sure. And I do just like want to address like just one thing. I do want to like get your
Mm-hmm.
perspective on it before like we conclude. Like I kind of felt like throughout this chapter when it talks about the Civil War that probably have to dig more into it, but of course like majority were men who fought in
Mm-hmm.
this war, not like really women. And some of them were like probably young, some of them probably had families,
Mm-hmm.
and that freedom did not apply to their families, for which of course they probably had to work to buy their freedom. But do you kind of think also, probably getting like a little bit too deep, but that because like some men fought in the war on like both sides, and like some men probably had families, and even though they were trying to gain their freedom to um be free but also work that way they can come back to get their families, not knowing what would happen since slaves were seen as property and like they could just
Mm-hmm.
be like dispersed all over the place.
See what you're saying. Mm-hmm.
um do you think like that kind of, in a sense, I don't want to say it's like the foundation, because like we've read like different other parts of like how the Black community has like come together in such like a beautiful way and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. But like, do you think that's somewhat kind of like a little bit like the foundation block for like us as like a community? In a sense, do you think that's kind of like followed us throughout history till now?
Wait, what exactly followed us throughout history? I'm a little confused. What exactly?
Like, let's see, I'm trying to like make a connection, like how like I guess like the emotional like side of it, like how like the man escapes or they go and volunteer to be like in the British Army or the American Army, and how like they leave like their families because they're like, okay, like we can like get freedom, like we can gain
Mm-hmm.
freedom on both sides, even though we know for the British that was something else, and they probably never saw their families again, for which had a lot of heartache and stuff. But then for
Mm-hmm.
the American side, like if they did have families and they were men and they were free and they were um they started working that way they could go back and like buy their family's freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think in that time, like emotionally wise, like if you were like the son of a man who went off and fought for the war, and you're like, my dad's coming back to get me, my mom, and my sister and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
but like I guess like he doesn't come back, or like something happens, like I guess like abandonment, if that kind of makes sense.
I guess so. That's what you're making a connection with right now.
Like
I
just a
think that's
little bit.
interesting. It's an interesting idea. I see what you're saying, but I mean, that's a thinker right there. It really is though.
Because like I want to say that they're trying to do like the right thing, like they're trying to like come
Mm-hmm.
back to like their families and stuff, but like during that time they're seen as property. So what if like the slave master, they're like, we're gonna like disperse you all and stuff, and you're like, wait, no, and you're like, wait, like my dad fought the war, like we've heard that like they're all free, and like maybe he's like working to like for his freedom, like
Mm-hmm.
working to like gain money that way he can like free us all. But like what if like they never come back? Because I don't want to say like the negative part, but like the book never talks about that,
Mm-hmm.
you
I
know.
mean, I don't know about that connection exactly about whether black men leaving their families today versus black men recently leaving their families back then. I don't know about that connection, but there is connections there though, most definitely. Talk about opportunities, how often that the parent will have to go somewhere else, travel somewhere totally different, whether that's leaving with the mom or leaving with the grandparents to try to work somewhere else to get some money. You see
Mm-hmm.
that still today, because opportunities are not present in our community. So you still see that today, especially. I remember seeing an old black movie back in the 90s that about the father having to leave to go to like San Francisco. They stay in Chicago. He's got to go all the way over there to go work. Can't bring his whole family because he doesn't have enough money. The duality of trying to be present as a father, yet have to provide for them at the same time. I think that's definitely a connection right there, and speaks to the lack of opportunities that are still that still aren't present for Black families nowadays. I think you can make connections with how slave masters often, they were probably happy, talk about slave masters they always pitted slaves together so they never had to fight them themselves. If slaves are too busy fighting themselves, they'll never realize that they got to fight the master in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So often, you talk about, what is it called? I spoke about it before once. It's about this certain kind of note how it's one slave master wrote that he penned light skins against dark skins, men against women, old against young, as much as possible, divide the communities within his plantation to make sure they never realize that if they all collectively thought together, they could take him over. And that's often methods they'd employ. But those are connections I can see.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. I was thinking about that a little bit.
Yeah,
but
it's a good question. Definitely is.
It goes on to talk to like just sum it up really. It focuses more on like the North than like the South. The book like establishes that the South, like they're not going to change in their ways of like keeping their slaves. So it's established them, but it talks about more how slavery was abolished in the North. It mentions the case of Monbet in 1780. A slave in Sheffield, Massachusetts, filed a suit that helped push her state towards abolishing slavery for good because she was being hit and abused by her slave master's wife, and she connected her case to the Declaration of Independence on like how all men are like free and equal. And she presented her case to a lawyer, and he's like, yeah, we're gonna take this and go all the way with it. The case won. Massachusetts like abolished slavery, like woohoo and stuff, like not the way that we all intended it would, but it like abolished it physically, like yippee. But it abolished it. It also was a case that inspired other cases in the North to abolish slavery, and it ends on saying closer to freedom. Really, I kind of like the subtitle closer to freedom because they were like, it's just the American War, American Revolution, and like we have read that like the South, they got the slaves down there. It's horrific. It really is. We've seen pictures. They have pictures, but they were closer to freedom. They were. I want to define it more of that in general, looking at the subtitle, closer to freedom, they were closer to physical freedom than societal freedom. It's more of like physical freedom. Because I think in American textbooks, they're just like freedom, but it's not really freedom at all, for which they define it as. It's just physical freedom. So, so I wanted to take your take on this, Jackson, how you felt at the end of this chapter with reading it.
I was proud. It's kind of like happy. There's few happy moments reading this, and that's one of those happy moments. Yes, North, you're finally at it. We're going somewhere now. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're on the right path. Getting your freedom through courts. Smart shit. Not even gonna lie. But honestly, it left me with a happy feeling. I'm glad we're finally here now in this point in history where things are starting to change, things are starting to get better and improve, because it seemed like for a while things were just getting worse and worse and worse. So I'm glad, sooner we're going to be heading on an upswing again here within the next couple of chapters.
I know, leading up to like the Civil War and everything, and in between even after the revolution. So it's going to be an interesting couple of chapters after this, for sure. Like, I can't wait to get into it. But that concludes chapter 3, part 3, everyone, about slave soldiers and the outcome of the revolution. I really appreciate Jackson for being on the call with me today and conversing like he always does. Stick tuned for next week's episode. For me and Jackson, truly, it really is out of this mind kind of podcast, I believe, from people from our hometown who are really stepping up to the plate, speaking out about what's going on and actually wanting to make a change, really. And we're extremely proud of them. So you should stick in to see who we are going to be talking to in the next podcast. You should also check out what we're saying on our social media pages. That way you can kind of get a couple hints of what's going on and like who's going to be there. I think everyone's going to be excited. But I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day and stay safe.